She parked her Lexus in my barn like it came with a reserve sign and a mimosa. No, 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 not. Just waltzed in like she paid the mortgage on my hay bales. Ever had a stranger claim your property because it's visible from their walking trail? That's how I found myself locking a woman with a clipboard inside my own barn while she screamed about aesthetic buffer zones. My name's Blake Rourke. I live outside Shady Hill, and apparently that's not far enough to escape a HOA Karen on a power trip. I knew something was off the second my boots crunched over fresh tire tracks that hadn't been there yesterday. The gravel in front of my barn looked like someone had peeled in, parked, and left with zero shame. It was 7:14 a.m. Saturday, and I hadn't even started my coffee yet. My plan was simple. Clear out the old hay, fix the hinge on the south gate, maybe take the afternoon off. But no, HOA nonsense doesn't care about personal schedules or property lines. It always finds a way to scream through the cracks. My name's Blake Rourke. I'm 44, a retired welder with more torque wrenches than friends, and I live on 10 acres just outside the border of Shady Hill, Colorado. I moved here for a reason. No sidewalks, no neighbors within shouting distance, and more importantly, no HOA. At least that's what I thought. Turns out the residents of Ashfold Hollow, an overpriced subdivision with artisan mailbox clusters and mandatory flagpole etiquette, had a different opinion. Specifically, their HOA did. More specifically, Karen did. Her name's Beverly Holloway, but let's not pretend she hasn't earned the title. She's got the bob cut, the clipboard, and the uncanny ability to treat anything outside her jurisdiction like it's a crime against humanity. The barn was open because I'd aired it out the day before. I rounded the side expecting a stray animal or maybe the mailman's truck backing up. What I saw instead was a silver Lexus RX parked dead center inside, like my hay storage was valet service. And in the driver's seat, Beverly herself, legs crossed, sunglasses on, scrolling her phone like she was waiting for her latte. I knocked on the window. She looked up casually, then rolled it down 3 inches like I was a hotel valet. "Oh, hey, I just needed some shade while we organized the trail cleanup," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the woods. "It's a community effort. I'm the liaison for this boundary zone." I blinked. "There's no such thing." "Well," she huffed, "it's within the HOA's visible environment, perimeter." "You're parked in my barn," I said. "Private property." Doors were open. She shrugged. "That's basically implied consent." I stared at her for a beat, then reached behind me and slid the barn doors closed. The bolt clicked. Her eyes widened. "You're not serious." I was. She started honking like it was going to summon legal immunity. I locked the padlock, walked back to my porch, and called the county sheriff. Beverly was still yelling by the time Deputy Troy Carson pulled up 20 minutes later. He stepped out of his cruiser with the patience of a man who's seen this before. "Morning, Blake," he said. "Got a situation?" "Trespasser," I said simply. "In my barn." He raised an eyebrow. "Again?" "New one," I replied. He walked up, knocked on the barn door. Beverly cracked it open, voice already trembling with righteous fury. "He locked me in. That's illegal. I'm HOA." Troy deadpan. "Ma'am, you're not HOA out here, and this is his barn. Did he invite you in?" The doors were open. Still not an invitation. 5 minutes later, she was in the back of the cruiser, and I was finally pouring my coffee. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just another annoying encounter. This was an opening move. HOA Karen had drawn first blood by rolling her Lexus into my barn like she owned the valley. And if I knew anything about clipboard crusaders like Beverly Holloway, she wasn't done yet. But neither was I. Welcome to Shady Hill, where barns aren't just barns, they're battlegrounds. The letter arrived 3 days later, folded with a kind of smug precision only a HOA board president or a retired IRS agent could master. The envelope had that fake official vibe and boss logo, pale blue trim, and a return address from the Ashford Hollow HOA administration office, which was just a converted garage behind Karen's subdivision clubhouse. I opened it with a coffee spoon, already bracing for some fresh nonsense. Inside was a one-page notice titled "Formal Notification of Visual Buffer Zone Encroachment." It claimed my barn extended 12 feet into the HOA's Shared Visibility Harmony Corridor, which apparently was a real term in their minds. The letter stated that my structure violated aesthetic boundary expectations and included a hand-drawn map that looked like someone copied it off a placemat at a Cracker Barrel. A thick red line was traced across my property, cutting directly through my hayfield, and a cartoonish arrow labeled unapproved barn intrusion pointed right at my roof line. The letter was signed, of course, by Mitch Holloway, HOA president, clipboard spouse to Beverly, and the type of guy who probably owns multiple monogram polo shirts. It ended with a courtesy request to voluntarily initiate relocation efforts or repaint to conform with HOA visibility standards. I stared at it for a moment, then looked out the window at my barn. It hadn't moved an inch in 15 years. If anything, the field around it had shifted from erosion. But I knew how this worked. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was about pressure. They couldn't win on laws, or they were trying to win on paper. The problem was, I know paper, and I know better. The next morning, I drove down to the county recorder's office in downtown Iron Hill. The clerk behind the counter looked like she'd been filing property deeds since the Eisenhower administration. Her name tag read Lois, and her mug said, "I survive bureaucracy daily." I handed her a copy of the HOA's map and asked for the most recent plat records on my parcel. She squinted at the sketch like it had personally offended her. "This is garbage," she said flatly, then disappeared into the back. 20 minutes later, she returned with a manila folder, placed it on the counter like a mic drop, and slid it over. "Your land stops at Maple Creek, always has. Barns entirely inside. No easement, no encroachment, no shared zones. That HOA ain't got jurisdiction over a squirrel on your fence." I smiled and made 6 copies. On the way out, something caught my eye on the public bulletin board, a flyer for the Ashford Hollow HOA's upcoming community town hall. It read, "Public session, land use, shared views, and community concerns, Thursday at 6 p.m. It was open to non-residents. Interesting, most HOAs like to hide behind closed doors, especially when inventing terms like visibility harmony. But now they were hosting a public show? Fine. I circled the date with a Sharpie and stapled one of my plat copies to the fridge. If they thought I was going to roll over because of a fake sketch and a couple of big words in bold font, they'd picked the wrong neighbor. I wasn't just showing up. I was bringing every receipt they never expected me to keep. And I don't mean grocery ones. The Ashford Hollow clubhouse looked like someone tried to recreate a ski lodge using beige vinyl and landscaping rocks from a clearance bin. By the time I arrived, about 30 residents were packed into the main hall, sitting in rows of folding chairs that creaked louder than the tension in the air. Up front was a long table with 5 HOA board members seated like they were about to judge a pie contest. Mitch Holloway sat dead center, glasses perched on his nose, a stack of manila folders in front of him like legal ammo. Beverly was right beside him, arms folded, lips pursed into a frown so tight it could snap steel cable. Mitch banged a plastic gavel to call the meeting to order. "We'll begin tonight with updates regarding the southern boundary integrity," he announced, voice flat but trying to sound presidential. "Our records indicate an unauthorized structure has breached the shared buffer zone, and we are initiating preliminary compliance review." He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. A few heads turned toward me already. I let him finish his performance, then stood up slow and walked down the center aisle with a black contractor's briefcase in hand. Dead silence, save for one guy adjusting his neck brace in the second row. I stopped at the front table, unlatched the case, and laid out 6 neatly stapled packets. "This," I said, tapping the top page, "is a certified plat map from the Iron Hill County Recorder's Office. It shows the exact boundaries of parcel 3127, my land. This barn you're so concerned about, it's fully inside the property line, always has been." Mitch stiffened. Beverly reached for something in her binder like she was looking for a fire escape. "The letter you sent me is based on a hand-sketched cartoon. Your claim is fabricated, and that red line? Pure fiction. You're not enforcing a rule. You're trying to steal land through intimidation." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Someone in the back whispered, "He brought documents," like I'd smuggled in a grenade. Then a voice cut through the noise, crisp, amused, and loud enough to bounce off the drywall. "Are you the guy who locked her in the barn?" Heads turned. A white-haired man in a windbreaker grinned at me like he'd spotted Elvis at a gas station. "You're my hero," he said, chuckling. I gave him a nod. "That's me. She parked at my barn, uninvited. I closed the doors. She called the sheriff. He called it trespass." People began murmuring louder, not against me, but toward the board. One woman stood up, baby on her hip. "They fined me last month because my dog barked at a jogger. Said my fence was provoking hostility." A man beside her added, "They made me repaint my porch because it didn't match the seasonal color palette. My porch is gray. What season is gray? Not okay." Mitch tried to regain control, tapping the gavel like a guy trying to stop a dam with a chopstick. "This is not a forum for personal complaints," he said. "Actually," I cut in, raising my voice just enough to carry, "this is exactly what it's for. You're making claims you have no right to enforce. You're threatening homeowners with made-up violations, and you're now caught manufacturing documents. That's not oversight, that's overreach." More residents stood up. Someone shouted, "What else have they lied about?" The walls were closing in, and the king and queen of Ashford Hollow were suddenly running out of peasants. I packed up my briefcase. Slowly, the war wasn't over. But that night, the town hall wasn't theirs anymore. Something didn't sit right the morning after the town hall. My front gate was closed, same as always, but the padlock was unlatched. Not open, just hanging. Still looped through the chain, but not click shut. It was like someone had fumbled the job or wanted me to think I'd forgotten, which I hadn't. I locked that gate every night, same as brushing my teeth. I checked the barn, nothing obvious missing, but something was off. One of the feed bins was open. A drawer in my workbench left halfway out. My welding torch, normally mounted to the far corner, had been dragged across the table like someone yanked it, then abandoned mid-theft. That's when I noticed a binder had been flipped open and 2 pages were gone. Not misplaced, torn out clean. Someone had been digging, and they weren't subtle about it. That night, I installed 2 trail cameras, one pointed straight at the front gate, the other hidden behind a hay bale, angled low toward the barn's main entrance. I'd used them before for spotting coyotes. Never thought I'd need them for catching HOA board members playing Mission Impossible. But 3 nights later, around 2:30, i.e. midnight, the footage came in, and it was gold. The grainy night vision showed 2 figures walking down my gravel drive with flashlights, bobbing like guilty ghosts. One tall with a reflective vest, the other shorter, arms stiff, haircut sharp enough to qualify as its own HOA violation. Mitch and Beverly Holloway, clear as day. Mitch pulled a small pry bar from his jacket and started working the barn padlock like he was cracking a soda machine. Bentley stood lookout, phone in hand, probably texting the HOA group chat, just securing the neighborhood. Once inside, they found out like they owned the place. Mitch snapped photos of my equipment, angled deliberately toward the propane tanks and acetylene lines, trying to make it look dangerous, no doubt. Beverly flipped through a binder on my desk, then tore out a sheet and stuffed it into her jacket pocket. After 20 minutes, they left. The gate, again, left unlatched. By sunrise, I had the SD cards copied and burned to disk. I drove straight to the sheriff's substation where Deputy Troy Carson was eating a powdered donut and trying not to get it on his keyboard. "Got something?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "You tell me." I slid the DVD across the counter. He popped it in and watched the footage, arms crossed. The screen lit up with night vision Mitch fumbling a padlock. At the 30-second mark, Troy leaned forward. By the time Beverly stole the documents, he was already shaking his head. "They broke and entered," he said finally, "and they took something." He ejected the disc, slid it into an evidence envelope, and labeled it with my name. "That's burglary, Blake, not trespassing. This just escalated." He opened a file drawer, pulled out a form, and started typing. "We're forwarding this to the county prosecutor's office, and I'm adding both of them to an active investigation. You just moved this from clipboard drama to criminal inquiry." I nodded. Figured as much. Troy looked up and smirked. "They're not fighting with rules anymore. They're fighting with bolt cutters." And that was the moment I knew this wasn't about barn paint or fake property lines anymore. It was a full-blown war, and HOA Karen had just crossed the felony line. By Monday morning, the story hit the front page of the Shady Hill Gazette. Right there between a headline about a runaway llama and a bake sale recap. HOA leaders under investigation after trespassing incident turns criminal. There were mug shots. Mitch looked like he just smelled expired hummus. Beverly's expression was somewhere between offended and constipated. Underneath, the caption read, "Community watchdog or legal liability." Spoiler alert, it wasn't the first one. That little article broke the dam wide open. Within 48 hours, the community group chat exploded like it had been waiting for permission. Residents who'd been quietly grumbling for years finally came out swinging. One woman posted a photo of a violation slip she got for aggressive wind chimes. Another guy uploaded an invoice from the HOA demanding $85.00 for unscheduled leaf shedding his tree in autumn. But the real bombs started dropping when folks began questioning where their dues had gone. Enter Dina McLean. She's the type who alphabetizes her spice rack and color codes her Christmas lights. Used to be a financial analyst before retiring early. She showed up at my gate with a manila folder and fire in her eyes. "I've been tracking the HOA spending for the past year," she said. "I knew something smelled off when I saw a line item for emergency ornamental mulch." Inside the folder were spreadsheets, dozens of them, cross-referenced with board meeting notes, banking statements, and invoices that seemed about as real as a $3 bill. And there were charges labeled community event planning that coincided perfectly with Beverly's weekly spa appointments. Same vendor name, same timestamp. Payments to a landscaping company that no one had ever seen in person. One reimbursement request was for neighborhood coordination lunch, which happened to be at a 5-star bistro an hour away and included 2 bottles of wine. "It's not even a BYOB neighborhood," Dina said flatly. "This is theft disguised as maintenance." She brought the documents to the interim audit committee. Residents had already started forming one just in case the board collapsed under its own nonsense. The committee didn't just review Dina's findings, they expanded them. Another neighbor who worked in IT cross-referenced dates with HOA communications. Someone else pulled HOA-sponsored trail cleanup logs and noticed that the volunteer hours were logged at double the time it would take to sweep a sidewalk. Everything pointed to a coordinated effort to pad reports, inflate labor, and reimburse themselves under the radar. Then came the HOA Town Forum, a follow-up meeting meant to restore confidence. This time, the chairs were filled with people holding printed screenshots, violation slips, and receipts. The atmosphere had shifted from compliance to reckoning. A man in fishing waders raised his hand and asked, "They fined me for having a canoe on my porch. I live by the river. Where the hell else am I supposed to put it?" The room erupted in laughter, not because it was funny, because it was true. Ashford Hollow wasn't just fed up, it was waking up. The clipboard empire had cracked, and now everyone wanted to see what had been hiding underneath. And spoiler, it wasn't just ornamental mulch. By the end of the week, the charges against Mitch and Beverly grew longer than a CVS receipt. The county prosecutor filed an amended complaint listing criminal trespass, theft, falsifying property documents, and, just to keep things spicy, sabotage of public infrastructure. Apparently, that trail repair incident from last year, where a county truck blew a tire on a spike strip, footage surfaced. Guess who was seen lurking in the bushes with a clipboard and what look a lot like landscaping wire cutters? That's right, Mr. and Mrs. HOA. The fallout was nuclear. Residents called for an emergency session, this time not hosted by the HOA, but by a volunteer group of homeowners who had well and truly had it. The agenda? One item: dissolve the Ashford Hollow HOA. There wasn't a debate. There wasn't even a protest. Ballots were passed around, pins clicked, and within 20 minutes, every single household had voted yes. A few even added handwritten notes in the margins, things like, "Burn the bylaws," and "Good riddance, Karen." I didn't even vote. I just watched from the back and let democracy do its thing. With the HOA effectively dethroned, the community did what HOA leaders never could: organize something useful. A temporary oversight committee was formed on the spot. No suits, no gavels, no laminated mission statements, just 6 people, 2 laptops, and a shared Google Drive. Their first job: audit the HOA's internal records and sort through whatever was left in the clubhouse filing cabinets. Someone brought donuts. Another brought whiskey. It was the most productive HOA meeting Shady Hill had ever seen. They found a lot. misfiled invoices, duplicate reimbursements, whole folders with nothing but shopping receipts for what Karen had labeled aesthetic cohesion materials. But the kicker came when one resident, Donna Laux, a retired postal worker with a talent for sniffing out BS, uncovered a purchase order for a community patio set, cedar finish, estimated at $1,499.00. Attached was a shipping confirmation. No patio set had ever appeared in the common area, but a photo surfaced from Beverly's since deleted Instagram account showing her sipping Chardonnay on a cedar lounge chair next to a pool in her backyard. Donna printed the photo, pinned it to the clubhouse bulletin board under the heading Exhibit A, and circled the chair in red Sharpie. Someone added a sticky note that said, "Community seating, huh?" in block letters. It stayed up for a week. Ashley had gone from whispered grumblings to full-on renaissance. With the regime toppled, neighbors were suddenly talking, laughing, helping each other like people again. There were bake swaps, dog play dates, a garage sale that raised money for trail repairs, the real kind, not HOA invoice fantasy repairs. The fear was gone. So were the pink slips and fine threats. The only thing left from the old board were some abandoned folders, a bucket of branded pins, and a dusty plaque that read, "Excellence in Residential Compliance." No one took it home. The new committee used it to prop open the clubhouse door. It started with a knock on my fence post, not a door, just the side rail of the east paddock. Curtis Neely, the guy who owned the land adjacent to mine, was standing there holding a thermos and a cardboard tube under one arm. He was the kind of neighbor who waved, nodded, and didn't say much. But today he had a plan. "Got a minute?" he asked. We unrolled the tube on my workbench. Inside was a hand-drawn layout of a shared-use garden. Raised beds, a compost corner, a chicken run, and a greenhouse shaped like a Quonset hut. "Figured it was time we used this space for something more useful than HOA tantrums," Curtis said. "No dues, no bylaws, just anyone who wants in." I looked at the plan, then out across the empty strip between our properties, and nodded. "I bring the fence posts," I said. Within 2 weeks, the project was alive. People who'd never spoken beyond HOA complaint slips now swapped tomato seedlings and weeded side by side. A retired mechanic fixed the irrigation timer using parts from a 1980S lawnmower. The Watson twins, aged 9, painted signs for each garden bed, misspelled charming and laminated with packing tape. Someone donated 2 pygmy goats named Ruth and Justice. The local librarian brought a picnic table and started reading picture books to toddlers under a fig tree sapling. No one asked for permission. There were no meetings, no color palettes, no compliance forms, just sweat, dirt, and the kind of conversations that make neighborhoods feel like neighborhoods again. For the first time in years, I saw people waving without checking if their fence height was under regulation. One guy even installed a hammock between 2 cedars and tied a paper sign to it. "No fines, yes naps." The land where HOA officers once marched with clipboards now bloomed with squash blossoms and sunflowers tall enough to block out bad memories. And no one missed the old days. In fact, someone spray painted over the old HOA bulletin board with bright yellow letters, "Closed for good behavior." No one cleaned it off. Word about the garden spread. Folks from other neighborhoods came by to ask how we'd organized it. We told them the truth. We didn't. It just grew like anything worth keeping. What used to be a cautionary tale had turned into something hopeful, even sweet. Mitch and Beverly's names still came up now and then, but not in fear, more like an inside joke. One woman named her tomato plant Karen. It died mysteriously, despite great sunlight. One afternoon, I was adjusting a trellis post when I noticed a fresh wooden sign nailed to the trailhead by the old HOA walking path. Carved letters, hand-painted in green. It read, "No fines, no fear, just tomatoes." Below that, someone had scribbled in Sharpie, "And goats, definitely goats." I leaned on a post and smiled. HOA empires fall, but good dirt, that stays. Courtrooms always feel colder than they should. The fluorescent lights buzz like a bad memory, and the chairs seem designed for maximum spinal regret. But on sentencing day, the room was packed. Neighbors showed up, not with signs or shouting, but with coffee thermoses and folded arms, the silent kind of attendance that says we remember everything. Mitch Holloway pled no contest to a list of charges that stretched the entire left margin of the court transcript. Beverly did the same, only after her lawyer leaned in and whispered what I assume was a version of, "You're out of lifelines, Karen." The judge handed down 18 months of probation each, 500 hours of community service, and permaGoo ban from serving on any HOA board in the state of Colorado. They also had to repay over $42,000 as 0 cents in restitution, which the community voted to use for trail maintenance, garden supplies, and a new fire pit behind the clubhouse, now renamed the Commons. I didn't attend the after party, but later that week, a small group from the garden project showed up at my place. They brought a wooden plaque, carved from reclaimed cedar and burned with careful lettering. It read, "Line holder of Shady Hill for knowing where the fence ends." Underneath was a simple brass plate etched with the date my HOA was officially dissolved. I didn't say much, just nodded once and offered to mount it on the old barn wall, right next to where the fake property line used to be, I said. That got a few smiles. Life moved forward. The barn went back to storing hay instead of a controversy. The goats stayed. So did the garden. HOA forms stopped showing up in mailboxes, replaced by handwritten invites to potlucks and seed swaps. Beverly and Mitch moved out of town. Word is they rented a cabin 2 counties over, somewhere HOA free. Irony's got a long memory. Ever so often, I'd get visitors, folks from other neighborhoods, other towns even, asking how we pulled it off, how we stood up, how we kept it legal. I'd hand them a copy of the county plat map, offer them a cup of coffee, and tell the same thing every time. Know your land, know your rights. And never trust anyone who wears a reflective vest and says liaison without laughing. One morning just before fall rolled in, I brewed a fresh pot and stepped out to the porch. The air had that crisp edge to it, like the season was shifting gears. I walked out to the barn, same weathered siding, same creaky hinges, but something about it felt steadier. The fence line stood firm in the distance, breeze rustling through the pines, no Lexus in sight, no clipboards, no noise. And on the barn wall, the plaque caught the morning light, a shimmer of brass under a blue sky. I leaned against the post, hands wrapped around a mug, steam curling upward. There was peace again, quiet, earned, real. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the land finally remembered who it belonged to. That barn stood through all their storms. So did I. Some battles aren't fought with fists or fury, but with paperwork, patience, and a perfectly placed trail cam. Blake didn't just defend a barn. He defended a principle, that boundaries matter, both on a map and in life. And sometimes the best way to deal with a Karen is to outlast her with cold logic and hot coffee. So next time someone waves a clipboard like it's the Constitution, remember, fences don't just mark property, they mark dignity. Tell us, what's your HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments, like if you've ever wanted to lock entitlement in a barn. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we prove that common sense is the most powerful tool in any shed. No fines, no fear, just stories worth defending.